Hi everyone, Aiden here at the etrailer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the RockyMounts AfterParty SwingAway Bike Rack. If you're familiar with the RockyMounts GuideRail, this is going to be very similar in the way that it holds the bike by our tires, and everything else is pretty much a carbon copy of the GuideRail, except that this has the SwingAway base. So it's going to be really nice for vans, trucks with tailgates, any sort of situation where you might want to swing the rack away rather than just being able to tilt it down. Let's check it out. Much like the GuideRail though, this does still have the tilting feature. That's a pretty big advantage for most platform style bike racks, especially the higher end ones, where you've got a handle at the end that we can pull to tilt the whole rack down with bikes loaded. Now it does have a pretty aggressive tilt, so do watch out for it if you've got this thing fully loaded. But you can see on our truck today where that issue comes into play with the tilting is that we don't get full clearance with our tailgate to open it up. It would make contact. And that's pretty true for a lot of different trucks or sprinter vans, any sort of situation like that. That's where the SwingAway comes into play. So if you've got a vehicle where the tilting works and you just need quick access, it's great to know that you have it. But if we go further underneath the bike rack, there's going to be a blue handle here that we can start to loosen up to unlock the tilting. And once that's fully released, there's a pin off to the right that we can pull to release the arm. Now, as I fold this out, I can stand up, readjust myself, and I like to get on the other side of the rack because this will actually swing away a full 180 degrees. This pin at the end will lock in to secure the bike rack on this part, and in the middle the pin will lock in to secure the arm. This gives us full room to open up our tailgate without any sort of clearance issues. So if we need a place to sit down and change our shoes before or after our ride, or just have a place to sit and maybe have a meal if we're going off-roading or going out for a long camping trip. Now the one thing with any sort of SwingAway bike rack is going to be all of that weight so far out from your hitch. You can see that the arm is sagging quite a bit right now, and that's going to be pretty true for really any sort of SwingAway bike rack. It's just because of how far that weight is out. So for me, I probably wouldn't leave it out like this all the time. If you're maybe folding it out to have a meal or just change your shoes before or after your ride, something like that, I think it's going to be just fine. It gives you that access when you need it, but I wouldn't leave it out extended like this for days at a time with bikes loaded. And whenever we need to fold it back in, just pull these pins to release it. I like to do the middle one first just to get the arm started. And as we fold it in, we can pull the outer pin to release the bike racks there. Now, I like to walk around just to get myself into a better position now. So as I push it back in, I'm not getting stuck between the bike rack arms. Push it until you hear a click. That's going to be the pin locking back into place, and then re-secure it with that hand knob underneath. So as we're tightening this down, it's going to reach a point when it's fully tightened and that handle's going to be in a certain position. Whether it's straight down like this and we maybe don't want it there to help with our ground clearance, just pull it out and flip it around and it'll free spin and lock back into place. Now if you have it straight up like this, it will interfere with the tilting mechanism. So if you plan on using that tilting that we showed you in the very beginning, make sure it's just off somewhere to the side like this, where it'll be out of the way of the tilting and not interfering with your ground clearance. As for the bike rack, it's going to work with a really wide range of bikes. It's going to hold them by the tires using this dual wheel mount design, which for me is one of my favorites. It's really easy to load and unload because of that. Those arms open up really wide to just give you a clear path to load up your bikes, and it's not going to make any sort of frame contact. So for alternative frame bikes and carbon frame bikes, they're going to be just fine on this rack. And with a 60-pound weight capacity per bike, it can handle some e-bikes too. Just keep in mind to have that battery unloaded just so you're traveling safely still and help reduce the weight of your bike a little bit. The one thing I will point out is this design isn't always the best for bikes with fenders, so do be cautious of that if you have fenders, but for any of the other bikes that don't, this will be really, really nice. As far as how sturdy the bike rack is, it definitely seems solid. Compared to something like the RockyMounts GuideRail, which this is pretty similar to, it feels just about the same. Up here at the bike, it holds it really well, but I do want to see how it performs with all the added moving parts of the SwingAway arm, because that can drastically change how bike rack performs. It changes the height of the rack and how far it sticks out from the vehicle. So let's take it on our test course and see how it does. Before we take this out and drive around with it, I am going to remove the chain lock. As a security feature that RockyMounts includes, that can be unlocked at the very end of the bike rack using the included key. And it's going to be a really solid way to secure your bike, because rather than just a cable lock, it's a very thick chain, and it has this fabric around it to help protect your bikes. But because of the weight and size of it, RockyMounts still does recommend taking it off whenever you do hit the road, just because the weight of it can maybe cause some damage to your bikes going down the road as you hit bumps and experience shock back here. So for now, I'm going to take it off, and we can pop it back on later whenever we're going to leave our bikes unattended while parked. As far as how it performed on the test course, I was actually pretty surprised. With extra moving parts, sometimes these bike racks don't perform as well as you might expect them to, but overall it was very solid. There's definitely some movement, but the bike rack corrected itself very quickly when we went over our bumps or side to side. The one point I did notice some movement in the bike rack was with the front tires, and with this style of bike rack where it holds it by both tires, that's pretty common because the only thing holding this front wheel in place is the wheel hook. So there is a little bit of room back and forth for it to pivot. Certain bike racks like the Ceres MHS actually add an extra strap or a block on that front tire to help hold it in place a bit better, and it does work really well. But most often that isn't really the case with this style of bike rack, and most of them just have the arms. So you're gonna have a little bit of movement, but it is very stable overall. As far as getting the bike rack unloaded goes, that's going to be really straightforward like we mentioned. To do that, you just have to release the ratcheting mechanism on the arms by flipping these blue levers up and allowing them to just move freely, being pushed away from the tires on either side of the bike. The thing I like about these ones is that you can really just push them out as wide as you want to. So if you've got a mountain bike with a longer wheelbase, it's going to be easy to load it up. No need to worry about fishing it through the arms or them not opening up wide enough. And it'll support a max wheelbase of up to 55 inches. With those arms unlocked, they just move freely. So whenever we're done, we can just push them back down and flip that lever, and that'll have it locked down in place. That lever is what engages the ratcheting mechanism, so when we're loading it up, it's just as simple as having that lever thrown and pushing it down onto the tire. And loading this up is very straightforward too. Even with the bike, just have it off to the side, throw those levers to open the arms. You can push them open as wide as you need. And then you just have to lift the bike up into place. Now I will say, because of that SwingAway arm and just with this bike rack in general, it's pretty tall, so it is going to be a little bit of a lift depending on your hitch to get it up into position. But because there's nothing in your way, you've got a clear path to lift, and it's really easy to get set up. Really, the only way you get any easier is with something like the Kuat Piston Pro X with the buttons that open themselves. But at that point, you're looking at a different style of rack. This, I think, is more than enough for easy loading and unloading. The other thing you want to watch for is your wheel diameter on your bikes. This will work with anywhere from 20 to 29 inches in diameter. And the way you adjust that is by actually moving this block on the wheel hoops. It does require tools, but the tools will come with the bike rack. Just an Allen key on one side and a wrench on the other to loosen up this nut. And that will allow us to slide this up and down within the tracks to adjust for our different size tires. I do really wish that this was a tool-free process, and the fact that it isn't is a bit of a deterrent for me. But if you aren't planning on really carrying any different bikes, say you're just going with yourself and your spouse, and you're not often going with different friends with different bikes, then maybe this isn't really a concern. Or if all of your friends have very similar sized bikes, then again, it's not a very big concern. Really, you only have to worry about it if you plan on switching this pretty frequently. With the bike rack unloaded, we want to get some measurements to see how it's going to fit on your vehicle. Especially in this folded out state, this is something that you don't often see with bike racks. So you want to see how close it's going to sit to your vehicle and how far it'll stick out to the side in case you are in a close quarter situation and wanting to swing it away. So I'm gonna measure from the very center of the hitch. So you can go to your hitch on your own vehicle, measure from the center, and from there to the closest point of the rack is gonna be 45 inches. That's at the very end of this tray right here. So as long as you've got 45 inches from the center of your hitch to the outside of your vehicle, this will clear. And then from that same point out to the outside, the outer edge of the rack, that's going to be right at 65.5 inches. So that's how far it's going to stick out from the side of your vehicle. You can make sure that it's going to fit if you are in a tight parking situation, you want to swing it around, if you've got the room for it. Some other measurements are going to be just the standard position right here while you're driving. For those measurements, we're going to be going from the center of the hitch pin hole to the outer edge of the rack. That's going to be 34 inches. So you can go to your hitch on your own vehicle, take that same measurement from the hitch pin hole and see how far it'll stick out on your vehicle. And then as far as the closest point goes, we're going to do the same thing. And for that, the closest point is going to be 11.5 inches to right here. So that's going to be the point we can check to make sure you have bumper clearance. For most vehicles, I think that's going to be plenty of room. On my truck, I've got plenty of room here, so I don't think it'll be too much of an issue for most other vehicles, unless your hitch sits very, very recessed underneath. One thing that we can't give an exact measurement on, though, is the ground clearance, because that's going to be different for every vehicle depending on how tall your vehicle sits and how tall your hitch sits, because a lot of them drop down very low and some of them do not. What I can tell you, though, is that there is a very aggressive rise from the hitch to the bottom of the bike rack at the back here. So no matter what hitch you put it in, you're going to be getting a lot of extra ground clearance. Not to mention the tiered style design for the trays, where this rear tray sits up much higher than the front tray. That's going to be great for our ground clearance, getting us some extra room to work with if we're ever going off-road, but it also helps with bike-to-bike contact, helping to make sure that handlebars and seats don't come into contact with each other as much because of that offset design. When it's not in use, if we want to leave this in the hitch between rides, we totally can, and we can save some space by using that same handle as we used to tilt it as before and folding it upright. This is going to be the storage position if you want to leave it on your hitch, and that's going to reduce the distance we add to the back of our vehicle as well. So for that one, we're going to take those same measurements from the center of the hitch pin hole to the outermost edge of the rack. It's going to be 18.5 inches. That's to the end of this handle right here that controls the swing-away arm. As for the closest point, that's going to be right about 7.5 inches. So again, I feel like that's a good amount of room, and I feel like for most vehicles, you should have good clearance with the bumper. So this bike rack is going to work with a 2-inch by 2-inch receiver tube and only a 2-inch by 2-inch receiver tube. So make sure if you're checking this out for your vehicle, that your vehicle is able to handle the kind of weight this bike rack can carry and that it's got the proper hitch. The anti-rattle bolt that's included with it is a locking anti-rattle bolt and uses the exact same lock as our chain lock did up top. So that same key can control both points of locking, which is nice because you don't have to have extra keys in your key ring, and everything's going to be under the same system. Now the entire rack weighs about 70 pounds, which is quite heavy. Most of it is full metal construction. There's really not any plastic around the bike rack, which is awesome for the durability, but it makes it much heavier. So getting it in and out of the hitch can be a bit tricky. Luckily, the trays here actually make for really good handholds, and because it's all metal, they're very solid. So for me, I didn't have too much trouble getting it in and out of the hitch. What can be a little tricky is maybe aligning the hitch pin hole and getting the threads of the anti-rattle bolt to align properly. But with a little bit of back and forth, you can usually get it lined up pretty easily and threaded on. Tighten it down with the included tool or use a 3/4 inch socket. The thing I like about the lock is that it's a push to lock, so I don't have to fumble around with the key while it's in there. I can just push it into place, take the key out, put the dust cover on, and it's secured, and then fully tighten down that anti-rattle bolt from underneath. If the weight is a concern for you and you're worried about getting that hitch pin hole aligned, I would maybe recommend the etrailer hitch pin alignment collar. It'll tighten around the shank of the bike rack right here You install it after you get the bike rack installed, tighten it down, and then every time we put the bike rack back into the hitch, it'll hit that alignment collar, and then the hitch pin hole is aligned on the first try every time. So again, if the weight is a concern, that can be a solution for you. And overall, I think the AfterParty is a really solid bike rack. Like we mentioned before, it's very similar to the GuideRail, which is one that we've tested a lot down here at the shop. A lot of people have taken it out for their own personal use just to try it out and test it, put it through its paces, and everyone's a big fan of it, myself included. So for this one to be so similar, I know it's going to be a fan favorite of mine, and having that swing base is really nice for the trucks and vans because a lot of bike racks don't clear with the tailgate on the Maverick here, so having something that does is a nice solution. If you're looking at other options, I'd maybe consider the Backstage. It's also from RockyMounts, and it's going to be a little bit different. It can still support 60 pounds per bike, but one thing it does support that this one doesn't is fat tire bikes. That one can work with tire width up to 5 inches, whereas this one can only support up to 3 inches in width. So if that's a concern for you, that's another option. Just know that it's going to be a little bit different in the way that it holds the bike, not going to be a dual wheel mount design, and it's going to have a few more plastic pieces. So if you like the full metal construction, this is the way I would go, and if you don't need the fat tire bikes, then this is going to be a great pick as well. Whichever one you end up going with though, I think it's going to be a really solid bike rack, and that swing base is going to work really well to give you the clearance you need on your vehicle. Thanks for watching.